In a small, tight-knit community in the heart of Texas, a revered pastor stood at the pulpit every Sunday, preaching love, forgiveness, and the teachings of Christ. But beneath the surface of this faithful facade lay a dark secret that would soon unravel in a way no one could have anticipated. What happens when the person you trust the most becomes the architect of your greatest betrayal? On a fateful Sunday in March 2022, as the congregation gathered to worship, a chilling revelation would turn their world upside down, leading to a tragedy that would haunt the community forever. In a place her faith was supposed to protect and uplift, the sanctity of the church would be shattered by an illicit relationship that spiraled into a nightmare. What drove a respected pastor to engage in a clandestine affair with a teenage choir member? How did this forbidden relationship reach a heartbreaking climax? And ultimately, what led to a murder-suicide that left a town grappling with grief and disbelief? The story begins in the quiet town of Maplewood, Texas, a community known for its charm and strong Christian values. Nestled among rolling hills and blooming wildflowers, the town was a picturesque setting where families built lives filled with faith and camaraderie. The centerpiece of Maplewood was its church, a majestic structure with stained glass windows that told stories of sacrifice and redemption. The pastor, Robert Matthews, was a beacon of hope for the townspeople, known for his engaging sermons and warm demeanor. He had served the community for over a decade, nurturing the spiritual growth of his congregation and supporting local charities. Among the many faces in the pews was 17-year-old Sarah Collins, a talented and passionate choir member. She had grown up in the church, her voice ringing through the halls during worship services. Sarah was often seen as a bright, promising young woman, a future filled with potential ahead of her. However, behind her angelic smile lay a longing for approval and affection that would draw her into a dangerous web of deceit. As the spring of 2022 approached, whispers began to circulate in the church community about the unusually close bond between Pastor Matthews and Sarah. While many dismissed the rumors as the byproduct of small-town gossip, others couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was amiss. The pastor had become increasingly secretive, and Sarah had begun to withdraw from her friends and family, caught up in a world that was slowly closing in on her. It was a Wednesday evening when the first cracks in their facade began to show. The choir had gathered for rehearsal, the air filled with a harmonious blend of voices. Pastor Matthews was there, offering guidance and encouragement to the young singers. Sarah, in particular, seemed to be his focus. As they practiced, he praised her talent, his compliments turning into lingering looks that sent shivers down the spines of those who noticed. "Sarah, you have a gift," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I think you're destined for greatness." Sarah blushed, the weight of his words wrapping around her like a warm embrace. But what felt like encouragement to her was seen by others as an unsettling display of favoritism. As days turned into weeks, their interactions grew more intimate. Private meetings turned into late-night phone calls. Sarah's friends began to notice her absence, the way she seemed distracted and increasingly secretive. "Have you seen Sarah lately?" one friend asked, concern etched across her face. "It's like she's disappeared." But Sarah was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The affection from Pastor Matthews filled a void she didn't know existed. He listened to her dreams, her fears, and made her feel special in a way she had never experienced before. Yet, deep down, she felt the pangs of guilt creeping in, warning her that this relationship was wrong. One evening, after choir practice, Pastor Matthews invited Sarah to his office under the guise of discussing her solo for the upcoming Easter service. As the sun set outside, casting shadows across the room, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a mentoring session quickly escalated into something darker. "Sarah, you're different," he confessed, closing the door behind her. "I've never met anyone like you. I can't help but feel a connection between us." His words hung in the air, heavy and charged with unspoken implications. Sarah's heart raced, a mix of excitement and dread flooding her senses. She knew this wasn't right, but the allure of being desired clouded her judgment. Days passed, and the clandestine meetings became a routine. Each stolen moment felt exhilarating yet fraught with danger. They shared laughter, secrets, and the thrill of their hidden relationship. However, with every encounter, the stakes grew higher. Whispers of suspicion began to circulate among church members, and the tension was palpable. One Sunday, after delivering a particularly passionate sermon, Pastor Matthews found himself approached by one of the deacons, an older man with a keen sense of observation. "Robert," he began, a serious tone underlying his words, "there's been talk about you and Sarah. You know how small towns can be. It might be wise to keep a distance." Matthews forced a smile, brushing off the comment. Just a mentor-mentee relationship, nothing more. But the weight of his words belied the truth. The pastor was living a double life, a façade that was beginning to crack under the pressure. As the spring flowers bloomed, so did the mounting tension surrounding their relationship. Sarah, despite the thrill, began to feel the burden of secrecy pressed down on her. Each passing day felt like a ticking time bomb, and she grappled with feelings of isolation. She confided in her closest friend, Jessica, during a late-night conversation. "Jess, I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I feel like I'm in over my head, but he makes me feel alive." Jessica, sensing the danger, cautioned her, "Sarah, you need to be careful. He's your pastor. This isn't just about you two anymore." But the allure of their connection was too strong. The weekend arrived, and they decided to meet at a secluded park, away from prying eyes. The evening was perfect, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink. They shared laughter, secrets, and whispered promises. But with every moment, the underlying tension loomed larger. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a church member out for an evening stroll. Panic coursed through Sarah's veins. "We have to go," she urged, her heart racing. The thrill of their endeavors turned to fear as they hurriedly made their way back to their respective lives, the weight of their secret now feeling unbearable. The following week, the town was abuzz with rumors. A few parishioners had noticed the unusual connection between the pastor and the young choir member. Some dismissed it as harmless, while others grew more concerned. Whispers turned to accusations, and before long, the church community was divided. On a fateful Wednesday evening, the choir gathered for practice again, but this time the atmosphere was charged with tension. The air felt thick, every glance exchanged laced with suspicion. Sarah arrived, her heart pounding as she noticed the change in the demeanor of her fellow choir members. As Pastor Matthews entered the room, a palpable silence fell over the group. "Let's begin," he said, trying to maintain his composure. But the usual warmth in his voice was overshadowed by an undercurrent of anxiety. Midway through the rehearsal, one of the choir members spoke up, their voice trembling with uncertainty. "Pastor, there are rumors about you and Sarah. Is there any truth to them?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Sarah felt her heart drop, the reality of their situation crashing down on her. She glanced at the pastor, hoping for reassurance, but instead she saw fear etched across his face. "Of course not," he replied, his voice unsteady. "We're just working together on the choir." But the damage was done. Whispers continued to circulate, and the tension between the two grew more unbearable. Sarah began to withdraw, feeling the weight of judgment pressing down on her. The next day, She received a text from Pastor Matthews asking her to meet at the church after hours. As she stepped into the dimly lit sanctuary, her heart raced. He was waiting for her, his expression a mix of frustration and desperation. "Sarah, we can't keep doing this," he said, pacing the floor. "If the church finds out, it would ruin us both." "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I can't just walk away." Their argument escalated, emotions flaring as they grappled with the consequences of their choices. Sarah, feeling cornered, finally uttered the words that changed everything. "I'll tell someone. I can't live like this anymore." Pastor Matthew's face paled. "No, you don't understand what you're risking." The tension reached a breaking point, and in that moment, the fragile balance of their relationship shattered. Sarah stormed out, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and defiance. What would happen next would shake the very foundation of their lives. As the days turned into nights, the pastor struggled to contain the escalating rumors and the internal turmoil they created. The facade of a perfect life began to crumble around him. He found solace in prayer, pleading for forgiveness and guidance, but the darkness of his actions weighed heavily on his conscience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat alone in his office, grappling with the choices that had led him to this point. The walls felt as though they were closing in, suffocating him with guilt and fear. Then came the message that would forever alter the course of their lives, a call from Sarah, her voice shaky and filled with tears. "I can't do this anymore, Pastor. I'm going to tell someone." Panic coursed through him. He had dedicated his life to his faith, yet here he was, teetering on the brink of ruin. "Sarah, please," he begged, desperation creeping into his voice. "Think about what you're doing. You're throwing your life away." But Sarah had made up her mind. "I'm tired of living a lie," she said, determination ringing clear in her voice. That night, as the moon cast an eerie glow over the Maplewood, both lives hung in the balance, each decision echoing the weight of their choices. The following morning, Pastor Matthews stood before his congregation, a mask of calm plastered across his face. But inside, a storm raged. The sermon felt hollow, the words unconvincing. He scanned the faces in the pews, noticing the judgment in their eyes, the whispers that followed him like a shadow. After the service, a confrontation loomed. Sarah had spoken to a trusted church member, sharing her truth. The ripple effects of their relationship were beginning to surface. As the congregation gathered for fellowship, murmurs spread like wildfire, fueling the growing tension. "Did you hear about the pastor and that girl?" One member whispered to another, the gossip twisting the narrative further. The pastor overheard snippets of conversation, each word a dagger to his already fragile state. But it was the confrontation with his deacon, the man who had warned him previously, that sent him spiraling. "Robert, we need to talk," the deacon said, pulling him aside. "This can't go on. The church's reputation is at stake. You need to address this before it destroys you." "Don't worry, I'll handle it," he replied, the confidence in his voice a mere facade. But in the depths of his heart, he knew he was losing control. The weight of his actions loomed over him like a spectre, and as the days passed, he could feel the walls closing in. Then came the pivotal moment, a Sunday service that would end in tragedy. The church was filled with members, their faces masked with concern and curiosity, eager to hear the pastor's response to the unfolding scandal. As Matthews began to speak, the tension in the room was palpable. "I want to address some rumors that have been circulating," he said, his voice steady but laced with underlying dread. "I assure you, they are unfounded." But before he could finish, a voice cut through the murmurs, a church member standing to confront him. "What about Sarah? We know something is going on." Gasps echoed through the congregation as all eyes turned to the pastor, waiting for his reaction. The weight of their stares felt like a noose tightening around his neck. In that moment, the fragile mask he had worn slipped and panic set in. "This isn't the time or place," he snapped, the anger rising within him. "You need to trust me as your pastor." But trust was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The confrontation continued, accusations flying like arrows piercing through his carefully constructed façade. As the service reached its climax, Matthews felt his world unraveling. The weight of his secrets felt unbearable. With every word he uttered, the congregation's faith wavered, and their trust began to fade. Then came the moment of no return. After the service, the pastor returned to his office, his heart racing as he tried to collect his thoughts. But before he could catch his breath, Sarah entered the room, her face streaked with tears. "Why did you lie?" she asked, hurt flashing in her eyes. "You promised me you'd protect us." "I was trying to save us both," he replied, desperation creeping into his voice. "But it's slipping away. I don't know what to do." "Maybe it's time to come clean," she said softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. At that moment, the tension escalated, pushing both of them to their breaking points. In the days that followed, the community was gripped by fear and confusion. The pastor's life spiraled into chaos as he faced the reality of his actions. Each day felt heavier than the last, the weight of his guilt suffocating him. Finally, unable to bear the burden any longer, Matthews made a fateful decision. On a dark night, as the town lay shrouded in silence, he stood in the dim light of his office, his heart racing as he faced the unthinkable. In a moment of despair, he took a pen and paper, writing a letter that would become his final confession. As he wrote, tears streamed down his face, each word a release of the pain he had carried for too long. The letter outlined his feelings, the guilt he felt for his actions, and a desperate plea for forgiveness. But the final lines hinted at the impending tragedy, an ominous message that would echo in the minds of those who found it. "I can't live with the shame," he wrote. "This is the only way to find peace." With his heart pounding, he made a decision that would leave the entire community reeling. The next morning, a haunting stillness enveloped the church as the congregation gathered for Sunday service, but the air was thick with anticipation, the weight of secrets pressing down on their shoulders. As the service commenced, whispers began to circulate about the pastor's absence. "Where is Pastor Matthews?" a concerned member asked, glancing around the room. Minutes turned into hours, and unease settled over the congregation like a heavy blanket. Finally, a group of church leaders decided to check on him. As they entered his office, the sight before them was one they would never forget, a scene of unimaginable horror. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, and as they entered, they were met with a chilling silence. There, in the dim light, lay Pastor Matthews, lifeless, a note clutched in his hand. Panic erupted as the congregation learned of the tragedy. The once thriving community was thrown into chaos, their faith shattered, grappling with the horror of what had unfolded. In the aftermath, the community struggled to make sense of the loss. A funeral was held for Pastor Matthews, and the church was filled with mourners, many in disbelief over the events that had transpired. Sarah, devastated by the loss, faced a reality she had never anticipated. The guilt of their relationship hung heavy on her heart, a constant reminder of the choices that had led them to this tragic conclusion. As the weeks passed, the community began to heal, but the scars of the tragedy would linger long after. They sought to find solace in their faith, grappling with the complicated emotions of grief, anger, and betrayal. But for Sarah, the journey was just beginning. With the weight of the past heavy on her shoulders, she sought to reclaim her voice, using her experiences to advocate for others who had found themselves in similar situations. As time moved on, the town of Maplewood learned to remember both the light and the darkness that had shaped their lives. The legacy of Pastor Matthews would forever be intertwined with the haunting story of a love that led to tragedy, leaving a mark on the community that would never fade. As we reflect on this heartbreaking story, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced a situation where trust was broken? How can communities support those who find themselves in similar circumstances? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that delve into the complexities of human relationships and the impact they have on our lives. If there are other cases you'd like us to cover, please let us know. Together, we can explore the intricacies of the human experience and the lessons we can learn from these tragic narratives.